Serenbe is a place where people live, work, learn, and play in celebration of life's beauty. And we're here to share the stories that connect residents and guests to each other and to nature. This is Serenbe Stories. Today we are talking with journalist Gisela Williams, who's written for the New York Times, Elle Décor, the Financial Times, and Vogue, among others. In her own words, she's always been interested in people who pursue humanitarian projects and make the effort every day to be a better human. In her most recent article for Bloomberg Businessweek, she writes about the people who are building for the future of community and features Steve Nygren and Serenbe. We discuss the article and why she thinks it's important to cover this topic for the more skeptical reader and a business audience who would be investing time and resources into these forward-thinking eco-enclaves we call biophilic communities. But first, Serenbe Stories is brought to you by the Inn at Serenbe. The Inn is nestled in the rolling countryside of bucolic Serenbe, where guests can walk on the 15 miles of trails through preserved forest land, the wildflower meadow, and the animal village. You can relax by the pool, hot tub, or in rocking chairs on the wraparound porch. Play on the croquet lawn, swings, and in-ground trampolines. Connect with nature and each other, all while staying in luxurious rooms on the inn grounds or within the community of Serenbe. Book your stay today at serenbeinn.com. So I want to welcome everybody back to Serenbe Stories. Today we have, and I'm going to probably butcher it, right? But I'm going to try. Gisela Williams, who is phenomenal, born and raised in the United States, but lived a ton of time overseas, most recently in Germany, has been a journalist covering, would you say, utopian communities, kind of mapping these places. On your Instagram, I love it. It says, where sustainability and community meet culture and design. And we met you sort of a convoluted way through your sister-in-law originally. But then at the same time, you were moving back to the States and you were starting to do a story on utopian communities. And it ended up coming to fruition just recently in a Bloomberg piece called "The Fancy Neighborhood of the Future is an Earth-Friendly Intentional Community. Move over communes and gated neighborhoods. The new private enclave is all about making you and the environment feel better." So I want to welcome you and Steve to Serenbe Stories.
Thank you, Monica.
Thank you.
Welcome.
So you've been to Serenbe, so you have that sort of background, but you've also lived all over the world and grew up in the Northeast, but are now living in, of all places, back in Atlanta, Georgia. Tell us a little bit about yourself and your background and how you kind of came to these topics.
Well, that's a good long answer, but I think it started early on. I had actually a great aunt and uncle who started a school where I'm from, which is in Litchfield, Connecticut. And it still exists. It's called the Foreman School. And it's actually ended up being a private school for those with dyslexia. But originally it started as a much kind of more utopian type of school and project. Albert Einstein was actually on the board, and it was really a project of passion and love. The two of them never had their own children, but they put all their energy into this school. And my father went there, and he just is constantly quoting them. And so I think that must have colored my childhood. And despite the fact that I never actually met them they both died when I was very young. So I think maybe that's part of it. I was always kind of interested in people who really pursued humanitarian projects and really made the effort every day to make that decision to be a better human. During college, I went to Bali. It was just kind of a spontaneous thing where my anthropology professor just one day said to me, "Gisela, you need to go to Bali. I know that's going to be a place for you." And I was like, "What? Where? What? I can get college credit for that? Okay, good.
That's great.
Sign me up." So I did. I went there and I learned Indonesian, but beyond that, I learned about the culture, which is an incredibly rich culture that is as close to, I think, the most full and holistic culture that I've come across. And I, I was really engaging with it because we lived with families. We took part in all sorts of what they call upacharas, which are, celebrations and rituals. And so that was something that really, I think, made huge impact on me and what I was interested in. And then later in New York, I worked, I paid my dues. I worked for Condé Nast Publications. I worked for Interview. I did a lot of fact checking at different magazines, but I had always been interested in traveling, but not just traveling to hotels but experiencing other cultures. So I think that's where it all started. But then, of course, I've lived in Europe for the last almost 20 years. And, there's all sorts of interesting projects going on in Europe because, of course, with the EU, they were supporting a lot of these alternative projects for the, whether it was in Portugal or Spain. And also when I was in Spain, I lived in Spain, I was there when they had the Frank Gehry, the Guggenheim, and how that really just changed a whole city. That was sort of an interesting example of how architecture can make such a large impact on a city. Mm-hmm. So these are all the little stories that I kind of had picked up over time, and I then started freelancing for multiple publications, including Food and Wine and Departures. And the New York Times. I did a lot of stories for the New York Times for their travel section at the time. And I, was looking for example, I wrote a piece about what I called temporary restaurants, which then a year or so later was, turned into the whole pop-up phenomenon. So I've always been interested in trying to see things before they come. They're really well known in the mainstream culture and media. Mm-hmm. I really enjoy that. I feel like a detective, looking for these interesting stories that grow into larger parts of our culture. Mm-hmm. Anyhow, and then back to Bali, there's a lot of interesting people and pioneers there. Early on, I was interested in the Hardy family who started the Green School, yep, and then the Green Village, and Laura Hardy, they're the daughter of John, who is an incredible designer who's designing things from bamboo. So I just started to notice these spaces that were coming up everywhere, wherever I, was fortunate enough to travel, but there was no network, right? There's no one mapping this. There's no, website to mm-hmm. find these spaces. Everyone's kind of putting all their energy into these projects and working on their own with their own group. And, there are all these connecting ideas, but there was no actual network. So I just started to follow these places, mm-hmm. And write about them. And so that's how I ended up at Serenbe, because I moved recently from Europe to Georgia, which was kind of an unexpected move. I didn't have huge expectations. I didn't really know where we were going. I didn't, I've never been to Atlanta. I was I was excited, but also a bit nervous about it, returning to my own country after being gone for so long. Mm-hmm. But then almost immediately, my sister-in-law mentioned Serenbe. So I became very curious about it. And as you know, reached out and came over to visit.
Yes. And when you, so I have so many questions for you. So I'm not quite sure where to start, because I every time I talk to you, we end up going down sort of a rabbit hole of different topics and conversations. And we should let the listeners know that we also had this lovely other connection, is that you and my husband, we didn't know each other, but you went to Middlebury together, went to college together. And I just think that, right, it's that school is such a special school, and the people that come out of there really have that sort of, I believe, or at least the friends of my husband's have this really interesting philosophy like that they are a little bit anthropologists or cultural detectives, and they've each found their most, they've done such incredible things, really interesting work that maybe isn't in the mainstream. Anyway.
Another interesting connection you'll probably know about is I've met the Hardys because they did a presentation at the Global Wellness Summit where I was. So we've talked to them there.
Oh, really? I didn't realize that.
Yeah, no, it's all sorts of connections. Yeah.
Yeah. No, I can imagine that you would have a lot to talk about with them.
Well, and there, I've known a few people that have, just very loosely in New York who then moved because they were so drawn by the school that they left and moved to Bali. And then you did include a mention of them in this article that you did, which I think was great.
That's right.
One of the things I want to just jump back to when you were in Bali is you said that it was the fullest, holistic, sort of richest culture that you had experienced. And obviously as a student, you're sort of younger. Do you still feel that way? And sort of, can you elaborate a little bit on that? What was it, or what is it about it? I'm just curious.
Yeah, it's really interesting, but you probably know this. You mentioned yourself, a lot of people are moving there, for the green school, but for the last decade or two, I mean, honestly, even starting a century ago, there were artists and creatives who were attracted to Bali and spent time there. Some of whom articulated it and wrote about it. And now I think a lot of people who are there don't really even know what it is that they're attracted to. Many of them can get away with speaking English and having businesses there and not really engaging that much with the culture, but they feel it. And the what they're feeling ultimately is this incredible, let's say, gratification or just gratitude. Almost every day there's some kind of ceremony to give thanks. There's this huge focus on keeping a balance. If you take down a tree, you put up a tree or you give thanks, and they are consistently still very strong. I mean, I think you could debate that obviously modern culture moving onto the island has changed things for the next generation. But the truth is, it's still an incredibly strong culture that even, the current generation are very tied to. So, I have a bit of a theory, this whole idea, this excitement about Burning Man, that there's been a lot of, people who are really into it. But the truth is, Bali itself is kind of the original Burning Man, in that when they have the celebration for the dead, it's called the Nagben, and they make this incredible, we would call it like a Mardi Gras float type of a platform, depending, of course, on the wealth of the person who's died. And they build this beautiful thing, and they carry it through the village, and there's a whole ceremony around it, and then they burn the body as a cremation. And it's like both sort of a celebration to that spirit and to that person, but also this idea of making this beautiful piece of art, and no one really owns it, and then burning it. And a lot of the precepts of the Burning Man are also partly, you could find those things in Bali, in terms of, you have this incredible culture, this beautiful art, but they're doing it not to be famous or for their own self. They're doing it for the gods and their ancestors. So it's sort of a greater purpose behind this art making that exists on the island. I mean, now looking back on it, with a different type of eye as well, needless to say, it's not a perfect culture, right? Everyone is, so the firstborn is called Wayan. There's 5 names for people, depending on if you're born first, second, third, or fourth. So then it's, Wayan, Made. You don't have much, let's say, your individualism going on in a sense, but that's what makes the culture so strong. In terms of looking at it as a woman, I have to sort of be a bit more critical, because it's not, it's still very much of a patriarchy, and a lot of the women are relegated to doing the work at home. That said, they certainly have a lot of respect within the culture. So, I've looked back on it over time and been more and more critical in a sense. But I think that the belief and system is one that's extremely appealing, and for me has continued to ring very true. And there's a real belief in the power of nature, in that everything has a spirit and the importance of ancestors.
Mm-hmm.
You know, they really believe they're alive and looking down at everyone, or that you're also possibly a reincarnation of one of your ancestors. So there's this never ending thinking going on between the past and the present.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm still fascinated by Bali. And again, as I said, there's so many people there that have been drawn to the island. And there's a lot of things going on there, but you know, a lot of people don't really, if you ask them what it is that they feel attracted to, they don't actually know that much about Balinese Hindu culture, but they see it. It's probably the most visual culture in the world in terms of its beauty. I mean, like I said, there's celebrations, you know, women are carrying offerings on their head almost every other day. You find something in a village, the music, the gamelan music, all of it is so visual. So you don't necessarily have to understand it, I guess, you know, if you don't want to, but it's there to see all the time.
Tell me, because I do think that's interesting. You mentioned the Giri and how that changed that. And that made me think of Marfa in Texas, or Dia. Right. I know, Steve, you've been up to visit, it's Dia, right? Up in the upstate New York, I believe, right?
Yeah, that's right.
And even Burning Man, right? That changed that part of the world, or you could say Coachella changed, you know, sort of the arts. But that is an interesting idea, that somebody's idea and setting sort of this intention, whether that's art or architecture or a gathering, can change a whole place.
Absolutely. Well, and I think a lot about when I did this piece, I spoke to a woman named Joanna Frank from the Center of Active Design, and she was basically, what they're doing is kind of proving what we're saying here, which is that design has huge impacts that in general we haven't been able to measure. Mm-hmm. So, for example, that's what I'm saying. Like the people on Bali, they don't really know how this island has been designed, but they feel so well there. And I think that's probably true with Serenbe too, in that people who don't have any understanding of how it was built, the ideas behind it, they just feel well. And they can't really explain why, but there is, in fact, there can be guidelines to that. Mm-hmm. And there can, be an understanding of what it is that is making that impact. And what she was telling me, which is now, I think, more and more known, that your zip code or your design environment affects your health more than your genetics.
Mm-hmm.
I think we have way undervalued the physical beauty, whether it's nature, whether it's architecture, whether it's actual art. And this really came home when I was having a discussion with Dan Butner, who did the Blue Zones. And I said, Dan, you need to bring this up to date. I said, I was surprised one thing that isn't in there is beauty. And yet every place you've identified is beautiful. And so it's sort of taken for granted, or we identify it with historic or various things. But in fact, it is beauty. And I think we're realizing that more and more.
Well, and I would add it's nature too. I mean, I think that's what one thing Joanna mentioned too. And of course that plays a big part with Serenbe is nature.
Well, and nature is just naturally beautiful. I mean, it just is.
Yeah, the beauty of nature, I guess, is what it is. But it was interesting because she had broken it down through this research that they had, collected, that you can even kind of predict how you're going to get along with your neighbors depending on what your front yard looks like.
Oh, that's interesting.
People getting along.
Yeah, but I mean, if you look like you're putting energy into your yard, apparently, that makes your neighbor trust you more. But I mean, and that was actually how I started the piece for Bloomberg, was when we did that tour that you were leading, Steve, and someone had asked, how much does the maintenance cost for this beautiful landscaping? And it was just so great because in the end, you kind of shocked everyone by saying, it's probably half of what you're spending because we're doing it the right way in the end, because here, I mean, partly the excitement about Serenbe came to me because here I'm living in the suburbs of Georgia. And, the tendency here is to build these real estate developments. I mean, there's very few people who kind of live in independent homes, this is just the way I guess people build now. And I see that too, that, they just roll out the lawn. It's just not really this is not indigenous to Georgia. It's really difficult to maintain these lawns.
Yeah.
And you get a lot of toxins being sprayed just to kind of, maintain it, a lot of water being wasted. And yet what you have there in Serenbe, I think, is just so much more attractive. Just even if you're looking at it, purely as aesthetics, it's much more attractive. But then to add to the fact that you're saving money and it is better for your health, I think that's so interesting. And I think it's something that people really need to understand.
That's right. And very few do, but it's, I think it's interesting. A lot of people come here, and I don't know how you felt, but they say, oh, as great as your webpage is, your pictures don't do it justice. And I think it's similar to how Bali, people do not understand what they're feeling, but literally you have to feel it to really capture what we're doing here at Serenbe. And I think that's a good example. So how's the culture? Now you just described where you're living. It's a typical American suburb, just happens to be in Atlanta. And now under this unique period of time with the pandemic, how's the culture?
Well, we live in Fulton County, so we live north of Atlanta. And I have to say, coming from Berlin, I was surprised at how international, how well educated, like in general, all the interesting businesses here. Also the schooling. There's some excellent public schools around here. Our kids are going to a school called High Meadows, which is actually a private school and actually quite pioneering one that really embraces being outdoors. It's on an old farm estate. So despite the fact that the Georgia governor has kind of opened up bowling alleys, this county has been very careful about, the restrictions that have been put on us, and for the most part, staying at home. But
now, do you have sidewalks in your community?
Yeah, we do. We have sidewalks. And the truth is, I think there could be a lot of improvements with these more mainstream developments. But in general, you do have sidewalks. I've noticed actually in another community that I've seen, there's a lot of kids riding their bikes around. We didn't even bring our bikes because we thought, oh gosh, they're not going to get a chance to ride their bikes. Whereas, in Berlin, you ride bikes everywhere. We didn't have a car in Berlin. We just took public transportation or we rode our bikes. So I am, there was a lot of surprising things that that I've experienced moving here, often, quite pleasing. But one thing that I that's why I was really excited to find Serenbe is this, I feel like unfortunately what happens here is that people continue to follow these mediocre formulas without attempting to try something new. And so Serenbe, to me, is this incredible example of what a lot of these mainstream developers could be looking at. But as you said to me, when we spoke, you said, look, it was very difficult. It's difficult to be a pioneer. You can't, there's no example to show the investors or the bankers to say, look, but now people can use you, right? I mean, now people can use Serenbe, and that's why you had to start that small company, to help, right? To help others, because you told me that there were so many people ultimately that say, hey, Steve, do you mind meeting up for coffee? Can you tell me your story? And again, you had to really start a consulting business.
And it's amazing. I've had 2 calls already this morning that I've talked to people briefly. The pandemic has really increased that interest, not only in the United States, but other places. So what I see is people are really starting to reach out and think, oh, maybe we do need to change. Maybe we need some alternative ideas here. And I'm hoping people are becoming addicted to, the bluer skies and the cleaner air, and to see that this isn't some long-term difficult thing to get to, that it actually can happen pretty fast if we have the will.
Right. And also, I think having those examples and that research to then prove to investors that, clean energy, landscaping, beautiful design is all of huge value.
That's right. I mean, it's a huge value from the market side. And hopefully our policymakers will actually put some teeth into some of these policies to bring this forward. This is a health crisis. There are several other crises looming. And if we do not wake up and start looking at these, I mean, imagine if this was a foodborne virus, and we've allowed 60% of our food to be grown in foreign soils. And how would we adjust if that were happened, if we were to close the borders to our food supply? And so you think about all these things we're not dealing with.
Yeah, it's so true.
Absolutely. I mean, I think that, one of the people that I interviewed for this story, James Reagan, he has this concept called regen villages. So it's still in its master plan phase. But he has sort of thought of these developments as they should be completely self-sufficient. I mean, in other words, he feels like if we're looking to the future and looking towards less employment, towards maybe more of these viruses, and we need to really consider that the citizens in these developments might not have a consistent income, that they need to be able to harvest their food within those communities. And they need to also be kind of off the grid in terms of energy. So, I mean, he kind of took it to the next level and almost like a sci-fi level. But I think it's an interesting concept. And I think that since this whole COVID-19 reality has hit in, he's getting a lot more people, because a lot of people really thought his plan was kind of sci-fi. But now it's looking actually like a very smart way to move forward.
Well, that's it. I mean, what we think of as sci-fi is actual practical common sense today, as I say it. I mentioned the food, but what you're touching on, what he's doing is independence from the electrical grid. And we should be putting a lot more focus on that, because imagine if one of these earthquakes that had happened had taken out part of our grid. It's all so interconnected that we could have an occurrence happen in one part of the United States that would take out a third of the United States. And we're just not putting any energy in or funding to support independent grids, which is, I think, essential for us. So.
Well, I'm thinking also of Wi-Fi, for example. Like if suddenly we couldn't, had no internet, can you imagine how that much more difficult everything would be right now? We wouldn't be able to work from home. The children would not have as much schooling as they had. But I'm curious, when what would have helped you over the last decade of growing Serenbe in terms of government regulation or tax regulation? What would have been those things that really would have been helpful to you?
We were able to move on most of the regulatory things. I mean, it took energy, education, and most of them we were able to change. But the financial markets were the biggest hurdle, because unless you had feasibility studies, unless you could point to other places where that's happened, and it still is, even with Serenbe, there's just not enough volume that the financial markets are willing to fund this. And so because of their requirements and wanting to look in the rearview mirror, we continue to fund the same old thing. Mm-hmm. And it's not because the markets demanded it, it's because there just isn't enough product of the alternative.
Mm-hmm. That's right. And I hope, that, and my hope actually in a way with writing this piece was to show that that these kind of developments are actually smart investments.
Mm-hmm.
They're
That's right.
long-term investments,
Mm-hmm.
right? But they're smart.
And there you look at how long-term. If you, I think we're already seeing some of the things. I mean, the front yard is a good example that it's more economical. If we could start measuring improved health from a financial yardstick, then it would show the immediate financial return as well. And I hope through all this that various people have tried measuring that we get to a point where that is also valued along with a lot of the other things we look at with, marble countertops or dollars per square foot. We just have such a mixed up value system when we're thinking about our housing.
Mm-hmm. Well, and that's something that we've touched on in prior podcasts, but I do think it's worth reiterating that people come and they want to buy a house, but their first questions are not, what's my access to nature? Is the home a geothermal? What are the health benefits of the house? Do you guys have a farm nearby? It's, where is the big box store? It's these more, it used to be before we had a gym, is there a gym? And that's great, but it's like where's the trailhead? What's the air quality? Those aren't the first questions. And I think it'll be interesting if that starts to change.
Everyone's interested in how easy it is to be a consumer and how convenient it could be to fix us if we're sick.
Yeah.
So upside down, rather than staying healthy, it's how can I get fixed?
Right. Where's the doctor? Where's the target?
Well, but I do think that there is in the U.S., like I said, I've been outside of the States for 20 years and then, kind of reentering. I think that there is a growing and greater awareness of wellness, so I do think more and more people will be asking those questions.
Mm-hmm.
Don't you agree?
Oh, we totally agree. No, that awareness is really stepping up.
Mm-hmm.
Unfortunately, financial markets to fund those issues has a lag period to it.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Yeah. I do think that this moment, and actually when I spoke to, I think it's the Foundation for Intentional Community, the spokesperson,
mm-hmm.
she said that their website had gotten just thousands of additional hits, and so, for absolutely people are more and more interested. I also read, for example, that you can't even find, baby chickens anymore because so many people are buying baby chickens so that they can raise their own eggs. So I think different versions of these communities are really getting a lot of attention. And in general, people are thinking, towards the future that we should become a bit more self-reliant.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Steve and I were just talking. There's a nonprofit that we're both on, or Steve founded, called the Biophilic Institute. And the Biophilic board just met the other day. And one of our board members is Jeff Catch, who is the chief revenue officer for Rodale Institute in Pennsylvania, the organic agriculture group. And he sent us along, Steve, like 7 trends that were sort of silver linings of sort of what's happening. And 3 of them. One was self-sufficiency, right? One was interest in immunity and wellness. And then the one that was surprising was land conservation. That people are looking for open land. I can't think of what the other ones were, but I thought that those I'm fascinated as well, those trends, like what's coming, what are we going to, what have we left behind in this sort of now? And then what are those things we're going to leave here? And we're not going to take them with us as we kind of, go past the coronavirus. Like, what are those things that we're just going to leave behind and we just don't want to do anymore? We don't want to participate in, or we want to change the way we're thinking. But one question, you were saying the foundation of intentional communities, because that was a big conversation that we had about, are you an intentional community? Is Serenbe an intentional community? What is intentional community? I mean, you and I looked it up, right? I actually went to the definition because Steve and I are like, well, we're not, but what is it really? And so that was something that, is very specific. And a lot of people don't want to be grouped into, because it either is aligned with a little more of a commune concept or, a specific political, religious, or social sort of belief, and and its membership, where this is, Steve always likes to say, which I think is great, is like, we're building a town. It's just like everybody's welcome and everybody comes in and chooses to either visit or live. But tell me a little bit more about that, because I think you were really pushed to try and name this group of places.
This is back to the idea of like, I call, when I was writing about pop-up restaurants, I called it temporary restaurants. And, of course, I wish that I'd come up with, pop-up. But I think, all of these projects are very different. They really are. But it is helpful to have some kind of overlying name. Intentional community, I think, is very vague. It's vague enough to encompass all these projects, because it kind of just says, these are communities built with incredible intention, really strong, passionate intention. And I think that's certainly vague enough to fit a lot of these projects. But because I think intentional community, that term is colored a little bit by some kind of, commune hippie movement.
Well,
a lot of people don't want to be attached to that name.
Because I noticed, you called us what? Eco-Enclaves is what you tried naming it?
Yes. Yeah.
It somewhere you also talked about, the direction to be self-reliant. And the conversation we were just talking about, maybe self-reliant is just the straightforward indication of what those of us in this area are trying to do, whether it's our food supplies, our energy supplies. And it's more of a regional market rather than this global international supply chain.
Well, this is where I had to explain. It's like you're self-reliant, but you're also welcoming and creating community.
Yeah, well, there's a big difference between self-reliant and closed.
Right. But that's what was confusing people a little bit. Somehow they feel like it's enclosed and cut off. No, it's just, it is self-reliant, but it is very, that's what I was explaining. That was sort of the examples that I was using in my piece were very much places that were welcoming. In fact, in some cases, which is the case of Serenbe as well, there are hotels, there are restaurants, there's all places that people can come and visit and engage. If you talk about the other, I also talked about Powder Mountain and Summit. And those guys are all about experiences and events that bring people together, really bring a variety of creative people together and entrepreneurs in order to kind of rub up against each other and come up with exciting ideas. And that is, so, all of these projects have kind of different reasons or purposes for coming together. But I was really trying to look at the ones that kind of had this common, let's say, intention, which involved everything from land preservation to an attempt to be self-reliant to embracing a community.
Yeah, you wonder if, we get a lot of people saying that they just can't believe it's real, and I don't know if that's preconceived or when they're here, they're just, the things they see don't seem to be common, which is, a whole nother story. But I wonder if that's it. The word, the utopian is used, enclave. And so does it seem too special that nobody feels like you can have this, or because it is slowly but surely being, I don't want to say replicated, but it is, people are being inspired by all of these concepts, right, to do more. But if they feel like it's utopian, which if you will, I think you said like utopian light, utopian isn't real. That doesn't exist, right? That's like this perfect place that, like you were saying, like Bali, like there's criticisms of it and, nothing's perfect. And so maybe we're putting too much hope or, I don't know, belief that can't we have a better life? I wonder if we're not giving ourselves enough credit that we can have the life we want to live. So somehow we don't believe these places are real, Or
yeah, I think that there's a tendency in general to throw the baby out with the bathwater. I mean, why are people angry, or why is there this kind of, with the whole like hippie commune movement? I mean, we can look back at it and make fun of it, but the truth is there were a lot of positive things that came out of it too. So I think that there's this tendency to just totally, be very extreme about making these, having these opinions, and basically shutting down something that's actually extremely helpful. I mean, I think, and this is sort of a bit off the topic, but there was this article in the New York Times Magazine about Gwyneth Paltrow, and you can make fun of Gwyneth Paltrow all you want. She's not doing this for the money. She's doing it because she really cares, and she might want to be, who knows, like some sort of wellness guru, but in the end, she's just trying to help people, and yet everyone's just bringing her down. And I think it's easier in some ways to do that than to actually attempt to be a better human every day. And I think that was sort of like the line that connects a lot of these projects, is that the people behind it every single day are making decisions and saying, is this better for society? If so, I really want to go that way. And I think it's a lot easier for people to just not think that way, because it's not easy. For example, I mean, I started a little kind of environmental group at the school that my kids go to, because I was surprised at how many people here, don't think about styrofoam and plastic materials and recycling. After coming from Germany, it was quite shocking to me that there was so few people concerned with that. And so, I think it's just this culture of, making things easier for yourself. It's much easier to call in and deliver something than make something yourself. But, I think that this time now, of course, everyone, this delivery culture, convenience culture, in a way, like Amazon is making so much money. They're really doing well, but in the end, that's not really great for the environment,
right?
Is it? So I guess what I'm trying to say is that I feel that it's easier in a way to pull down these really ambitious humanitarian ideas. It's easier to make fun of them than it is to actually try your best. But I find that a shame, because I think that we have now, unfortunately, a little bit of this reality in the US where we feel that no one can make a difference, that no one can make impact, which is absolutely untrue. But we just rather say, you know what, there's just too much. Like, how can one person fight the fight? I need to take care of my family. I need to just, make it through. So I understand that. I understand that, because, it's harder and harder, I think, for people to survive at like a middle class level. But I think it's extremely important to have these examples of all these people. There's a lot of Americans who really, as one person, have made great change. And I think it's important to show those examples.
Yeah, I think, again, we talk about, why do you make change, and that you can have change. And I think one thing, you're right, like people can be very dismissive. And that's easier, but how do we get people to just be a little more thoughtful about their choices they make, right? Whether that's styrofoam, plastic, or where you live, or just supporting the places, you don't even have to live here, but just supporting the concepts of going geothermal or putting solar panels on your house, or maybe my next car is going to be electric, but giving people hope and a little bit of inspiration that they can, do something. I mean, Steve, you talk about like in your own backyard, right? Like you started this not because you're like, I'm going to change the world per se, or change the way developers think about, you really started to protect your own backyard. And then it became this sort of mission. And I don't know if we've really heard any good cumulative names, like intentional community conservation community has come up, agri-hoods, but that's just a part of it. I think arts are interesting.
Right. I don't think there's anything that has managed to encompass all of these.
No. And you and I talked about, and I'll touch on biophilia again. I kind of pushed back on, well, what about biophilic communities? Like, what about that? The innate tendency to want to be a part of and be with and support living things. But I think, again, that concept or that word is still, it's maybe trickling out there, but that might be the one that I keep pushing for. I don't know what your editor.
I think that there just needs to be a lot of education about that word. People need to understand what it means, and it's still not on anyone's radar. But, I think regenerative, that term has been discussed a lot in terms of design, in terms of agriculture. So I think, maybe that's why James, named his master plan Regen Village, I guess. So that's definitely interesting. And when I spoke to John Johnson, who was someone that you guys met with, and they were very impressed with Serenbe for this article, he was saying that was his goal as well. The project he's working on in Costa Rica, he and his wife, they really wanted to make it all about regenerative design, regenerative agriculture. So I think, that's moving forward, maybe a good term to look at. I think, and again, I think the danger is too, even though it's helpful to have a name that somehow describes this movement, in this current moment where things just kind of get eaten up by media and then spit out like a few years later, you also worry that it becomes, overused. So for example, the word utopian, I think, is one of those words where people, they don't want to hear it anymore. And right. And they're very skeptical
like, what does
about
that mean?
it, but it's a good word,
Yeah, it is a good word.
I just think, again, utopian is sort of a word that you have to define, and it can mean many things. Right? It can mean nothing, and it can mean a lot, the term itself. And so it's maybe about claiming it and explaining it. But I think there's certain terms one can't even really use anymore for that reason.
I'm curious about, any feedback that you've gotten on the piece from either your editors or Bloomberg or friends or business. And I'll actually ask you first. And then Steve, I'd love to hear anything you've heard about it, because, different press affects Serenbe in different ways. But I'd be curious, like, are you, the good and the bad, like, are you getting pushback on the concept? Are people excited? Were they adding to it? What have you heard from about the Bloomberg piece?
Well, I got a lot of great positive feedback. I actually, a lot of people that I heard back from were those who were doing their own projects, which I was happy to connect with. I mean, there's just no end to people trying their best to create these really experimental spaces. And so I heard a lot from different people from around the world who said, "Oh, thank you for this article. I'm excited to be in contact with you. Let's I'd like to connect with you." So that was exciting. And in general, because of this moment, coronavirus, I did get a lot of additional interest from people that might not have been maybe as interested. So no, I definitely got a lot of great feedback from this one. I don't know. How about you guys?
Oh, absolutely. What I found interesting is people who reached out to me in LinkedIn or Facebook or just an email. And people I even know. We've had so much lifestyle kind of press that this hit more in the business community. And what I really appreciate is, while I don't have an exact example, I believe it's touched people that do hold financial strings, that this could affect their attitude to at least take a more serious look. So I thought it was a very important piece, the way you wrote it, and that it was in Bloomberg, gave a different tilt to it, than the press we've had on Serenbe.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And it's an incredible group of people. It's great, great. You curated an amazing, list of other, quote, intentional communities.
Who'd you talk with out at Powder Mountain?
Brett.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
It's an incredibly successful example of urban planning, right? It worked. It worked really well.
Yeah, it's great.
But I think it's too bad that we can't point to these places, and there can't be, a much more clear line, because we need more of that kind of smart urban planning. Mm-hmm. I mean, look at the High Line, right? I mean, people use that as an example over and over again. Every city in the world wants a High Line.
Yeah.
In New York, you can make a clear connection to economic impact. I think one of the most interesting things that are going on in general are these projects that bring nature into an urban space and urban culture into rural spaces. That's really some of the most dynamic projects I've seen, which, Serenbe, they bring urban culture into a sort of a rural landscape.
And that's a great connection. And we're all very similar in what we're doing. I mean, Atlanta, the Beltline has done all the same examples. But
yeah, the Beltline's great. I actually really love the Beltline. I mean, it's just very ambitious.
Yeah. And that's changing even a greater impact than even the High Line, because of the amount it is. But I many times point to the value of Central Park. I mean, both in nature and real estate value. I mean, what do we just take for granted? Absolutely. But it's the same thing. It's that master plan to understand those things way back then.
Yeah, you do wonder if over the past, 70 or plus years, master plan has sort of gotten a bad name, or development has gotten a bad name because of... Go ahead.
Yeah, lousy job of development, then no wonder it's a bad name.
Yeah. So we got to turn it around, which actually you're hoping to launch your own podcast, right? That would highlight, I think, these type of communities, whether they're utopian or conservation. But it sounds like, I really love the mapping, the idea. The mapping of is such a great way to think about it. So tell us a little bit about that, the vision for that and your timeline.
Well, it's funny because I a few years ago, maybe it's now 8 years ago, I did my own website and I made this big map. And my inspiration was sort of like some kind of 15th century, vintage map of the world, with all these kind of mystical creatures, hiding in the water. And I wanted to kind of map these places because I felt like no one was actually doing it, or I hadn't come across anything like it. But I felt like the truth is there were some people, some of these people don't even really, they're very skeptical about even getting themselves out there. They like to remain kind of private. So I had this idea of having this sort of secret little island on the map that if you knew about it, you could click and like find all these stories. But, another thing that has recently, because, with this podcast, this pitch that I'm putting together, I've really had to articulate what I'm trying to say. What are these projects about? What is it that, are special about these places? And I basically have come across the idea of the satire Candide. Voltaire, the philosopher, he kind of concluded at the end of that, of Candide, we must cultivate our garden. He kind of posed this question: do you march out in the world and make change, or do you just kind of make this, turn to your own backyard and make something kind of beautiful and creative that's for the greater good? And I think, that's what he was saying. You just, it's sort of a local effort that you just put all your heart and energy into, and it hopefully inspires and people and make impact. So that's kind of what I felt like about all of these projects that I've covered, that it was a bit like that, like making this beautiful garden that was open to the public and had some kind of humanitarian effort going on. And Voltaire himself actually did that. He was an amazing gardener, but he also started this watch company so that he could employ refugees. And it was extremely successful. Actually, it was like do good and do well, in terms of economic. It was an economic success story. So a lot of those kind of projects I'm interested too. It's sort of, it's not that we just have to redefine our environment, our design environment, but also our economy.
Yes.
I think moving forward, I think we're realizing that we have to redefine and remake our infrastructure. We're realizing that, right, with our health system, and so. But I think we all have to. So we all have to be connected, right? Because we can't, as individuals, just build a road. That's the government's job. But if as individuals, those who have the privilege or the luxury to do that, I think that they really are responsible for raising the bar and to helping people as they can, and then at the same time, we have to realize that we are all connected, and somehow we have to connect all these beautiful gardens and make it more of a universal one.
That's beautiful. That's a great.
Well, start mapping it so we could refer to the map. You could have your branding.
Yeah, we'll point to you.
Yeah. That's good. No, I would love to, bring people together. I mean, you do, Steve, you have that forum, right? I mean, you have this conference, which I would love to come to when you get to make it happen, because it's so exciting for all these people to come together and share their ideas. I know that with the Highline, one of the founders, Robbie Hammond, he also created the Friends of the Highline, or like a larger group that was trying to connect all of these types of public space projects. Because I think it's really important. It is like creating a map and also bringing people together so that they can share their ideas, because a lot of them are pioneering ideas or innovative ideas that would help a different project. So I love the idea. It's too late for me to be some kind of 15th century explorer. But I feel like this is just exciting, to map all these forward-thinking ideas and projects and people. So I'm going to definitely keep doing it. And when I do get going on these, the pitches sent in, and I do these podcasts, I would really obviously love to talk to you guys again.
Yeah.
We'd love it. And you can explore in your own backyard. I think it's a good indication. Your image of the Southern South was very different than your reality. And I think Atlanta and the metro area is very progressive in a lot of ways.
It's so true. You know what? I'm so impressed with what's going on in Atlanta and urban farming. It's incredible, actually. I was just doing a bit of research about that. I think Georgia is really ahead of the game. And then I was also told about White Oak. I think it's White Oak Pastures, is like a regenerative farm in Georgia that's really ahead of the game in terms of, meat production. So I think Georgia is actually a really exciting place for a lot of these projects.
Did you know that for 2 years now, we have had a CSA program with White Oak? We're their first one.
Really?
Partnered with our vegetable CSA. So you can actually put in a prescription or subscription. It's both, isn't it? And pick up your vegetables and your proteins here at Serenbe. So
that's amazing. Do you guys deliver to Roswell?
We do not. Roswellites are welcome.
That's great. No, but I'm looking forward to. It really was impressive to see all these urban farms happening, and I think is it Ted Turner's grandson who's kind of part of the government in Atlanta.
Yeah, that's right.
Right? Yeah.
Who's also kind of helping out to.
He's the head of sustainability for the city. And then they had Mario had just left. But he was the urban ag director And it was the first urban ag director for any city in the country he was. And now I think there might be a few more, but yeah, you're right. Atlanta is a pioneer. Really exciting.
And it's about it's about food insecurity too. You know, it's really delving into these issues about food for all, not just for, farm to table, fancy restaurants. Like a lot of these urban farms are dealing with major social issues, which are incredibly important. And so, I've been very inspired by what I've found here in Georgia.
A lot happening. And the other thing we need to make sure you're tuned into is the Riverlands Project. I don't know if you know about that.
Well, you know what I found here in Rothwell, and I couldn't believe it, is the Greenway. I think it's called here. It's so fantastic. There's
a master plan that we've all been working on, and it's about to be made very public. I mean, it's not that it's not public. And that's dealing with 100 miles from Buford Dam to Chattahoochee Bend Park, south of us. And so this is make sure that the river trail all connects, but also in the south 53 acres is to make sure that we're looking at a vision so that it doesn't all get eaten up with development like it has in the north part of the city. So that it's the next big project, and it connects in the Beltline, the Silver Comet, and all these other things. So Atlanta's doing a lot. It's very exciting. Yeah, no, I mean, that's really ambitious and fantastic. I like I said, we found the Greenway recently, and it was so great because it felt like traveling to Southeast Asia. we ran into a copperhead. I mean, it felt so wild, and yet it was just off the 400. You know, it was right off of the strip mall, basically. You know, and it goes on for miles. So to then attack, to combine all of these spaces, that's incredible. We really should have brought our bikes from Germany.
Well, you got to purchase them for the summer.
I think it's worth it. We've decided. Yeah, definitely.
Well, this has been so wonderful. Is there anything you want to add? I mean, you know that I could talk to you forever, but I don't know.
I know. Well,
our listeners will listen forever.
I had this idea that we were all going to meet together because I told you this on an email. I must have thought that you guys were kind of somehow a bubble outside of the coronavirus situation. Or maybe it was just wishful thinking on my part. I was like, another reason to come to Serenbe.
And she's like, I'll see you at 10:30. I was like, on Zoom. We're not in person yet, but we're close. We're getting there. Who knows?
Yeah, exactly. Excellent. Well, it was so nice speaking to all of you.
Thank you so much. And we'll look forward to seeing you soon.
Definitely.
Bye, Gisela.
Bye.
There are two rubrics in building a city. You can follow the sprawl mentality, or you can preserve land while boosting economic development. Serenbe builds and designs to be both beautiful and environmentally sustainable. If you're a city planner, developer, landowner, or policymaker, there are common sense solutions you can take to build a biophilic-centered community. Attend the Nygren Placemaking Conference this fall to learn more. Details at nygrenplacemaking.com. That's NYGRENPLACEMAKING.com. Thank you for listening to Serenbe Stories. New episodes are available on Mondays. Please rate and review the podcast and make sure to email your questions for Steve Nygren to stories@serenbe.com. You may even get to hear them on the podcast. More details about episodes and guests are available on our website, serenbestories.com.